Hello everybody, and welcome to this special edition of the Human Physiology video tutorials with me, Dr. Amir Sandhu. Now in today's episode we're going to talk about the special considerations for incorporating exercise into your training routine to enable you to ride your motorcycle safely with maximum concentration. Now we're going to talk about some programming considerations, so specific exercises that you can include into your training that will translate into safer and more enjoyable riding, whether that be on a racetrack or be out on the road. Now, I've been riding motorcycles for the last 10 years of my life. I conduct a number of track days throughout the year, and I also hold the ROSPA Advanced Rider qualification, achieving a gold some years back. Now, it's always been very interesting for me to appreciate how physical riding a motorbike is. Whether you're riding a sports bike or you're riding an upright touring bike, there are physical demands which are obviously being exerted through the body, which will inevitably affect the concentration. But you also have a number of environmental stressors, namely the temperature, the weather, which affects a rider much more so than if you're in a car. So these are all things that we'll talk about, and particularly in relation to exercise. So the three most important types of exercises that you can include into your training program can be broadly defined into three main categories. So the first is going to be resistance training. Okay, now this might be anything which involves moving your body against weight, whether that be your own body weight or whether it be dumbbells or plates in a gym or using machines. So you're going to have resistance training. I'm just going to put TX for training. You're also going to have an aerobic component as well, okay, to your training. So aerobic training, and then you also need to incorporate flexibility. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to talk through each one of these categories, and then we're going to go through some exercises and using a principle called the FIT principle, okay, which is basically frequency, so the amount of times that you would do the particular training session in a given week, intensity, how hard you would do that training session, intensity, type of exercise, and time that you would actually allocate to a particular session as well. So these are when we talk about the programming considerations, we'll be using the FIT principle. But first we'll go through each one of these in a little bit more detail to show you how you can incorporate them into a training program. So let's focus now on resistance training then. So why is resistance training important when riding a motorcycle? Now, you only have to think about the tasks that a motorcyclist has to actually do. The physical task of actually moving the bike off a paddock stand or off its center stand or side stand and wheeling it out of a garage or up a drive requires considerable effort from the muscles. So you need to have some degree of strength in your muscles to be able to maneuver a bike, and even when you're sitting on the bike and you're using your legs to move the bike backwards or forwards or around, particularly when it's stationary, does require significant muscle effort. So we know that resistance training is very important to develop muscle strength. Okay, and on a motorbike we know that this is important for maneuvering the bike. Okay, so maneuvering bike in a whole host of different situations. Now, one of the other things that resistance training does is it improves muscle coordination. Okay, so it improves muscle coordination, which basically means that when you are riding a motorcycle, your inputs to the bike can be much more smoother. Okay, so resistance training helps to ensure that your inputs to the bike are smooth inputs. And we know that a bike is an extension of the rider. So if you are tense, if your muscles are tense, or if you make tense sudden movements, that will normally be translated in what you feel on the bike as well. So by having better muscle coordination, you're going to have much more smoother inputs, and you're going to have a much more safe and progressive ride. Now, the third thing is that by doing resistance training, you not only increase the strength, you also increase muscular endurance. Okay, so resistance training isn't just about increasing power and and strength, or the ability to lift. It's also about increasing endurance. Now, when you ride a motorcycle, you're often on the bike for long periods of time. You might do a ride which consists of over 100 miles, but even if you don't, even if you're doing, say, 30-mile blocks, motorcycles are often very physical. You're constantly having to counter the forces of braking that are going onto your upper body. When you're accelerating, your legs are hopefully gripping onto the tank to prevent your body moving about too much. And also, as you go into a corner and you're leaning, again, you're moving your body around. Some people may be hanging off the handlebars, or they may be using their legs to stabilize their body. But nevertheless, there's significant forces that your body is exerting on the bike in different situations as you ride the bike. And obviously over a period of time, so if we're talking about 50 miles of continuous riding, then your muscles are going to pay for the price of that, because each time they contract to keep your body stable on the bike, they're using energy. Okay, and there will come a point when they run out of energy and you start to fatigue. And when you start to fatigue, that's when your body starts to focus, or your mind starts to focus on these bodily sensations, and your concentration gets diverted from, instead of focusing on the road, you're focusing on what you can feel on your body. So by increasing your strength and your endurance together with resistance training, you're actually helping to spare some of the brain capacity so that it can focus more on what's going on the road or on the track and the hazards around, rather than the sensations of the body. And it means that the muscles can be much more efficient at using the energy to perform all of the different contractions and the movements that they have to whilst on the bike. So muscular endurance will obviously give you the resistance to fatigue. Okay, so that's the key thing that we're focusing on here, resistance to fatigue. So these are, in my opinion, the most fundamental benefits that you would actually get from performing resistance training for motorcycling. The fact that you would have increased strength, which would allow better maneuverability of the bike. Now, one thing that we have to remember is a motorcycle traveling at speed will have greater gyroscopic effect, which means that it wants to stay upright. So when you want to corner a bike and you need to lean into a corner, and this is particularly important when you're on a racetrack and you're doing higher speeds, then you're going to be using considerable energy and muscle movements or muscle contractions on your body to try and maneuver that bike to try and lean into the corner. That's a process that requires considerable effort from the rider. Now, having greater strength means that you're able to manhandle that bike much more easily to overcome the gyroscopic effect. Now, with the muscle coordination, you would be able to do that movement much more smoothly than if you didn't have the muscle coordination and you were clumsy. And the last thing that you need on a motorcycle is clumsy inputs. Everything is about being smooth and doing movements which are not overly exaggerated or aggressive in their nature. And then having that muscular endurance will mean that you'll be able to resist the muscles fatiguing as they carry out these particular actions. So let's talk a little bit about some of the programming considerations that you need to think about when performing resistance training. So what type of exercises should we actually be considering when we're designing our resistance training program? Now, the fundamental exercises include multi-joint exercises, okay? So multi-joint exercises are incredibly important, and they include exercises such as squats. Okay, now squats actually use over 200 different muscles in our body. Now, when you think about riding a motorcycle, and you think about the physical sensations going through your body and the movements and the inputs that you're actually making from your muscles, it wouldn't be surprising if we're using approximately 200 or if not more muscles to move the bike, because when you think about it, your arms, your back, your chest, your back, your legs, your calves, the muscles in your in your hip, around your hips, so the lower back, are all being used to stabilize the bike and be able to move that bike through its range of motion. So squats is a very important exercise to include into your routine. Okay, it's a multi-joint exercise. It will improve the leg strength. It will allow you to grip the tank much more firmly, which is particularly important under heavy braking and hard acceleration. And if you ride a lot on the track, then you will know that gripping the tank is extremely important to ensure that you're not sliding about the bike too much under those heavy loads. So squats, very important. Another exercise which is incredibly important for posture are performing deadlifts. Okay, so deadlifts will actually help with posture. So they'll enable you to have a much more relaxed riding position, because your muscles won't be so tense and they won't fatigue so quickly. So you'll have better posture. They also improve grip strength. Okay, so when you lift a deadlift bar, and as you can see in the demonstration, as you lift a deadlift bar, you're using quite a lot of your upper body and your forearms and your arm muscles to grip tightly to keep that bar stable. And this is the same thing when you're riding a motorcycle. You're gripping the handlebars. Obviously, you're not gripping as tightly as you would with a deadlift, but nevertheless, you need to have a positive grip, and you need to be able to have strong inputs going into the bike as well. So deadlifts help to improve your posture, your grip strength. They also help to ensure that you can resist fatigue. Okay, so your muscles can resist fatigue, because deadlifts, like other exercises, like the squat, is also a multi-joint exercise. So it will target all of the muscle groups in your body. So for riders that perform long journeys, this ability to resist fatigue from doing squats and deadlifts will be very beneficial. Okay, so you'd consider multi-joint exercises. That would be one. And then it's also important to focus on isolating exercises as well. Okay, so isolator exercises, which might include things like the bench press. Okay, so you do need to have strong chest muscles. Okay, so bench press would be quite important for you to include into your training routine. Military press or shoulder press, which basically means having a bar with some weight on either end and lifting it above your head. Okay, so this is good for the strength of your shoulders, your trapezius muscle as well. And then also focusing on doing some movements for your biceps and triceps. Okay, again, you don't need to have heavy weights for this. You don't need to have big biceps or big triceps. The idea here is to actually stimulate these muscles to have better power output, be able to have better endurance to resist the fatigue, and have better coordination, and have this ability to be able to feel the muscle. Okay, and then you would also do some exercises for your quadriceps. Okay, these might be leg curls, similarly for hamstrings. And we can also add on to here your calf muscles as well, because you know, your feet are doing a lot of toing and froing up and down the gears. Some people may be using the rear brake quite often as well. And again, that kind of finesse comes from the control that we have from our calf muscles. So again, this would mean that you'd be able to develop most of the key muscles that are involved in manhandling or in riding a motorcycle smoothly without having fatigue coming early on. Okay, so these are some of the resistance training exercises that you would need to consider in your program. We're next going to consider the importance of aerobic training for improving your motorcycle riding.